Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast. This is Bruce Hutchin, host and executive producer. Each week you will hear tips, techniques, strategies, and personal stories from some of the best and funniest whitetail hunters in North America. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, tell a friend on social media. If not, tell me and I'll make it better. Thanks for listening, folks. Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today. This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast, episode number 422. On the next episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, we're going to travel to Dodgeville, Wisconsin, and catch up with Art Helin. Now, Art Helin has Art Helin Outdoors, and Art travels all over the Midwest doing seminars all winter long because he represents some great companies like Vortex, Night and Hail, Realtree. But more than that, Art spins a good story, and he gets people laughing, and he sure does know his stuff. And on this show, you're going to hear about deer vocalization. And with the season coming up, pay attention because Art knows how to sound like a buck. Welcome to a special episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, and I have my partner with me today, Bob Rourke. And this is episode 3 of our current Whitetail webinar series. And today's guest is Art Helin, timing of deer, vocalization, and rattling. Art, what do you think about all this deer talk?
There's a lot of different variations of it, and there's a lot of different opinions on it. And, there's no better person or no better vocalization itself than the deer itself. And I've been fortunate to be able to hunt a lot during all the phases of the season. And so I get to hear how these deer, communicate and what they do. And which really helps, I think, instead of just reading a book or looking at something. And so that knowledge that I get firsthand, I get to bring it to people through seminars and through webisodes like this.
That's great. And hey, why don't you just take a couple minutes and introduce yourself? I know you're known throughout the Midwest, but we're pretty much across North America. So why don't you give us a little bio, just a couple minutes, telling everybody what Art does?
So I'm Art Helin. I've been in the outdoor industry for 23 years now, and I've been fortunate, as I said. I've filmed with Archer's Choice TV show for almost 10 years. I've been able to film with some other TV shows and hunt across the country. I also, my wife and I, Michelle, we do a lot of different things with special needs and youth to get young adults, young children involved in the outdoors. That's what we basically focus on now. I don't do a lot of the filming and stuff anymore because I concentrate so much on my seminars and trying to get the youth and special needs and other people just involved in the outdoors. So traveling around the country, doing seminars, doing some outdoor writing, working with a couple people on some different things with some books. I have a wildlife habitat management company, so I go out and help set up properties strictly for deer and turkeys and wildlife. So that kind of keeps me busy throughout. And I also have a photography business where I do a lot of wildlife photography work for a lot of different companies and some of the magazines and stuff you see out there. So
if somebody wants to get a hold of you, Art, how do they do that?
They can go to my website, which is www.arthelin Outdoors. It's ARTHELIN Outdoors.com. And you can go through that, and there's a contact spot on there where you can send me an email and contact me.
Are you on social media at all?
Yes. You can also Facebook, Art Helin Outdoors. If you like photographs, instead you can go to Wild Reflections Photo. That's my photography page. Also, there's Twitter, which I need to do a little more of. I'll be honest with you, and Instagram. Have been trying to do a little more there too. So, but my main focus right now is a lot of stuff is on my Facebook page, on the Art Helin Outdoors page.
Thanks, Art, for that background. Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you got a lot of questions from our listeners about deer vocalization, and we want to hear the story about why deer talk.
Art, I think this is going to be instructive and useful and educational for me as well. So I think why don't we just crank through the presentation and slides that you have here to kind of keep us pointed, and then as we go, if Bruce or I run across a question or something, we'll interrupt just rudely.
Sounds good to me.
Perfect.
We can. If you want to get started, we can get started then. So,
let's do it.
Why call deer is the biggest thing is that people have. And deer are very social animals. I used to guide elk hunters. I guide turkey hunters forever, and people do that because they like to hear that bugle. They like to hear that gobble from that turkey. They say, well, deer don't do that. They actually do. Deer are very vocal, and they do it for reasons. They want to locate each other. They want to attract each other. They want to intimidate each other. So what our jobs are is we need to break down and figure out when do they want to locate each other, when do they want to attract each other, and when do they want to intimidate each other. And that's the biggest problem I think that we have is using things at the wrong times of the year in different types of calls and different vocalizations that we shouldn't be using, and so they're not working right. And the other thing, when we call these deer, we want to use their natural aggression, their curiosity. So these are things that we have to break down because we want to bring that animal to us. It gives us the opportunity to see deer that we may not otherwise see. These deer could be, 200 yards away down in a thicket checking a bedding area at a certain time of year, and now all of a sudden you rattle or you grunt or you do something, it might draw that deer out to you, and you would have never seen that deer otherwise. So then you move into, well, if you're going to call these deer, what types of calls do you use? How do you call them? And so if you look at grunts, there's a couple different calls. There's grunts, rattles, snort, wheeze, bleats, and whines. And if you went and looked up deer vocalizations and deer grunts, you're going to get a list 10 miles long because they have so many vocalizations. However, there's truly three that I believe that will get you ahead of the game and get you started, and as far as grunts. And those three grunts that you really need to learn are going to be a social grunt, a tending grunt, and a challenge grunt. And those three calls, if you want to hear those, the way that they work, so a social grunt is what most of us learn. So we pick up a grunt tube and you go out and you go. That's just a social grunt. That is what most people go out and use because they don't know any different. And so they'll use that at a time when they should be intimidating and it's not. And so they need to learn that there's also a challenge grunt, which a challenge grunt will start out and they go. They want to drag that out and sound like you're mad. Sound like you want to fight that other guy. Just like when you're, in high school and you kind of get mad at somebody, you're going to show that, and you're going to get louder as you go along, trying to intimidate that person. That's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to intimidate them. So that grunt, again, is just the long drawn out, trying to sound mad. Then there's a tending grunt. A tending grunt is when a buck is following a doe that's in heat or thinks that she's in heat getting close. So a lot of people have heard this, they just don't know what it is. When a buck is chasing that doe, every time he puts his hoofs down, he's going. So he's ticking. It's like a tick, 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 tick. What he's doing is every time he's exhaling, pop, 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 and he's trying to sound like he's chasing her. Then he'll try to get her to stop. So as he's doing that tending grunt, he'll. keep trying to push her and try to get her to stop so he can get closer to check and see if she's actually ready to be bred or not. And that's your tending grunts. The other then is rattling. When you get into rattling, people look at, they think that they're going to just take and get all crazy with it and as loud as they can. And when they hit those, they're just going to get extremely loud and obnoxious. But there's different times a year to do different things. There's times when, truthfully, you just need to take those and click your antlers together, just like your two small bucks coming together, and you're just kind of ticking those back and forth. Okay, so that's what you kind of, there's times when you want to do that and make those sounds a lot less and not be as intimidating, okay, because they're younger bucks doing that. Then you also, again, when you get into rattling later on, when you sit there, you want to, if you've ever heard bucks actually rattle, they don't come up and just start cracking. They'll actually come up, they tick those horns together, they separate, then they crack, but as they go through, they'll stop because they have to push each other. So when they push each other, those antlers come to a spot where they lock together, and then they're going to push each other, stop, and then they'll start rattling again. Okay, so you need to learn the techniques and how to rattle properly, and if you want to be soft or if you want to get aggressive and when to do that. The next one is the snort wheeze. So when you're snort wheezing, this call I don't like to use at all as a blind call. What I mean is I'll rattle, I'll grunt, I'll do those things when I can't see that deer to try to get its attention to bring it in. However, with a snort wheeze call, a snort wheeze is more for a mature deer. So if you have good age groups on your property, that snort wheeze works really well on those 4, 5, and 6-year-old deer. The difference is those deer are a lot smarter than that 1-year-old and that 2-year-old. So they aren't going to come charging. They try to get downwind of you. So what I like to do is if I see that deer actually moving and I know that the wind is coming in my face, I don't want to grunt or I don't want to snort wheeze at that deer until he's at a point past me that I can call him down in front of me, because if I call too soon, he's going to try to get behind me downwind of me and bust me before I can get that shot. And a snort wheeze, there's a lot of new calls out there that actually have them built right in. So it's just draw that out. It's too short. That's how you want to do that. A lot of times you can even do that with your hands if you have to, but cup your hands. It'll give that little extra boost to that sound, to that air. So, that call, again, is used very well with older, more mature deer, but don't use that as a blind call.
Why do they do that?
Too many of those deer will sneak behind you. What was that?
Why do they snort wheeze?
They snort wheeze. It's an intimidation call. It's strictly about who is who on the schoolyard. It's I'm here to intimidate you. If you challenge grunt and they don't, a snort wheeze is strictly to intimidate the other deer. And so that's why it works on more of your older mature deer than your younger deer. I've seen it done where, you've got good age groups and you snort wheeze at a 2-year-old deer when you've got 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds on your property. It looks like you took that 2-year-old and shot him out of a cannon because he's already intimidated. He's been there. I've seen him turn around and take off so fast, that I've watched him actually when we filmed it, where you snort wheeze at a 2-year-old and they'll try to get out of there so fast. I've actually watched them spin so fast and bounce off of a tree and down through the woods they go and they're gone. 1 and 2-year-olds, that's a call that I just usually don't use on them. More of a grunt on those because it's strictly intimidation. That's what it is. So
well, I'm going to try my snort wheeze, and then you can tell me if I get an A, B, C, or not so bad.
Pretty good. Just try to draw that last one out as far as you can. So, yep. There you go. There you go.
The funny thing, I did that. I did that to a 2.5-year-old, and he just went inside out.
Uh-huh. which is
I was laughing.
is good and bad, because one, you know that means you have good age class and you have more mature bucks on your property. But it also means that you're probably not getting an opportunity at that 2-year-old if you want to shoot
No.
that deer. So that's
But
why I say
let's
I
stop
like
there.
to make.
Let's stop
Yep.
there for a second, because a lot of guys, they'll get excited and they'll see a buck, they'll see horns, it's got a great frame, but it's a young buck, and so they'll snort wheeze at him, and he takes off, and if the timing of the season isn't right, then that mature buck's going to wonder what's going on, and he'll get curious.
Right.
Agreed or disagreed?
Agreed. There's certain times that these calls should be used, and certain times when they shouldn't, because again, those older deer that are using this call more than other deer, they've been down this road for years and they already have it figured out, because the rut is all triggered off of daylight hours within a 24-hour period. So when it gets to that, they understand that and they know when this is going to happen, and this is when they start using this intimidation factor more, is throughout that time frame. So I'm going to break down here in a little bit. I'll break down those actual dates for you, for the Midwest, and dates fluctuate a little bit once you get out west and down south from what they are here in the Midwest. But as you said, yeah, if you use that at the wrong time, it's just like using social grunts at the wrong time. You use those, and that buck just lifts his head, kind of looks at you, and walks right on by, and you get frustrated and want to take your grunt call and throw it out of the tree because it's a piece of junk and it doesn't work. A lot of times it's because we're doing things at the wrong time of the year. So,
Bob, questions?
Right now I'm soaking it up. I think one of the questions that we get on a regular basis is, they'll catch a mature buck on a camera at night and it's nocturnal. And you go, how do you take and get that nocturnal buck into a position where you get an opportunity for a shot? And if you knew, as you were checking game cameras, you got a mature buck and he's just not coming in your direction, what types of strategies would come to your mind with calls to try to get that opportunity?
well, again, it's all going to depend on the time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's early in the year, we're going to break down some different strategies for you here in a little bit on
Good.
how they're going to move through there. And again, once you get into that pre-rut and that rut, now it breaks down even different, depending on the days. Because a lot of these deer, if you're rattling too late in the year, it's not going to do anything to get that buck out of his bed and come check, because they've already been through that intimidation phase and doing what they're doing. So you have to really look at days and look at the moon phases, and that moon phase is saying, hey, those deer should be on their feet now throughout, daylight hours, and then use these calls to your advantage.
Okay, so you're going to cover that here in just a little bit. So I'm getting ahead.
That's all right. So, to kind of finish up the calls here, bleats and whines. So there's different types of fawn bleats, different types of doe grunts, and estrus whines. Why do you want fawn bleats? Well, again, when we get into the next phase, we're going to kind of cover that, but you need to learn those. And some of these new grunt calls are great because you can actually go from buck grunt and just switch it over and go right straight into your doe. There's also push places on here that are push button for them, but you want to go. That's your fawn bleats. Your doe grunts, you can tell the difference in that compared to a buck grunt. Buck grunts are short, they're quick, and they're deep. Fawn or a doe, they're going to be just a little bit more drawn out, a little bit higher. Okay, and then your fawns. So learn that. Fawn distress. That comes in really handy, during that first phase if you want to shoot a doe early season. As far as estrus whines, well, they came out with this neat little toy years ago, It's pretty hard to mimic that on anything else. They make different sizes for how loud you want to get. If it's windy days, I like the bigger easy bleats. The real easy way to do your estrus whines, just go out and get an easy bleat, and you can get different sizes so you can sound smaller or you can sound like a older, more mature doe. So now I guess that these different types of calls. It is when are you going to use them is and how are you going to use them? Well, you want to really use them throughout the changes of the breeding season is what you want. And there's also seasons prior to that, which would be the early seasons, which there is no pre-rut or rut. You are what I call phase one, which is a season opener, and it depends on where you're at. You can go to North Dakota, you can go to Kentucky, some of these areas that open, September 1st when they're still in velvet, and just coming out of velvet to other areas that, are right around 1 week after they rub their velvet, up until some states don't open until October 1st. So you've got a whole month in there that's kind of phase one that things are different. And so depending on where you're at, if you're out in North Dakota, Kentucky, even Wisconsin, some of these states that are mid-September, I like to get out there and do a lot of, your fawn bleats at that time and whines, your social grunts. And why do you look at that? What happens at that time of year, if those fawns are still with their moms, what happens is that buck's mentality is telling him that if he hears fawns still with that doe, so if she's sitting there doing her fawn bleats, she does some doe grunts, that buck hears that, and it's a mature buck, not necessarily your younger bucks, but your mature bucks, they're going to come in there and they want to run those fawns off. Because the sooner they get that fawn off of that doe, the sooner that she comes back into heat. It's not going to happen. Mother Nature won't make it happen, but that's his mentality. It's that way with all nature. You look at bears, bears are the same thing. The sooner they can get those, cubs away from mom, the sooner she'll come back into heat. It's the same thing with deer. The sooner those fawns are gone, the sooner that she's going to come back in. So you got to play that card, the curiosity card. Do those fawn bleats and try to get that buck to come in with the curiosity and say, you know what, I've got to push these fawns away. I get these fawns away from mom. She's going to come back into heat. The other thing is, if you like to shoot does in the early season, that's when you want to do the distress calls. Because if you do a fawn distress, it's, mother's way of protecting the young. So she'll come in, usually gangbusters coming in to try to protect those fawns. And then we're sitting there being all mean and everything, waiting for her to come in to fill the freezer. And, just working off of her instincts is what we're trying to do. Again, we're playing them. So the other thing is social buck grunts at this time of year. And why is because this is like they're just coming out of velvet. So this is like the first day of school, your first day of high school. So now all these guys are coming in. You got your freshmen that are walking into high school, and they're like, you know what, man, this is my first year with antlers. I'm pretty big stuff. They come walking into school doing their thing, and all of a sudden that senior comes around the corner, which is your 5 or 6 year old buck, and all of a sudden that 1 year old's like, whoa, wait a minute, I guess I'm not so. Or that freshman's like, I guess I'm not so big anymore, am I? And so he backs off. That's what that social grunt is about. Those older, mature bucks will come in to see which new bucks are in their territory because they're trying to figure out their home range. Because you can only have so many mature bucks in a certain home range. So those mature bucks are trying to figure out what is their home range. And so when they hear these other bucks, their curiosity, they're going to come in there, see who's there, do their posture thing, show them who they are, and move on. And so that's a good thing early like that. So, and especially before that 15th of September, 20th of September. So if you're out in a different area doing that, then, you're going to move into what I call phase two. Well, phase two is that September 15th, 20th through that first week of October. So now you're picking up, your other states. The other calls work well up until the 1st of October, but there's other things that you can actually add now that you can't really put ahead of time. And what I really like to do when I get into this part is not only social buck grunts, but I really start to bring in that light rattling. At this time of year, all the seminars I do, I usually ask the question, how many of you guys are rattling, by the first couple weeks of September, mid-September? And you might get one or two guys. And I say, all right, guys, how's it work for you? And they all go, works great, as long as you don't go gangbusters. Because you're not going gangbusters at this time of year. That's why I said you have to learn the different sounds and the different techniques of rattling. Because at this time, this is when you just want to do this is what we call tickling the antlers together. So you just want to tickle, because at this time, usually your big deer, and as soon as I say it never happens, it's going to happen somewhere. But usually those big deer, they don't, they're not out there really fighting and brawling because they already know. It's that 1 and 2 year old. They're sitting there, and so they're tickling their antlers together, trying to figure out who is who and pushing each other around. Where that big deer, he's going to come in again, curiosity, again, just like that first day of school, and say, all right, who's making these sounds? Who's doing the grunting? He's going to come in and try to break them up, posture, show them who's boss. So these calls early in the season like this work really, really well, especially here in the Midwest. When you have your better concentrations of, your 1, 2, 3, and 4 year old deer, plus, your 5, 6 year old, your good age class, this works really well early like this. I had a friend of mine years ago called me up, and he says, hey, I got this really big buck every night coming to this field. And he won't do anything. He sits there, and I grunt at him, and he goes up to the top of the hill, and there's these 2 little bucks that have fought over there a couple nights. He said, little couple 1-year-olds. And he doesn't even pay attention to me. He goes over there, and he breaks them up, and then he follows them down in the woods. I'm like, well, get out your rattling antlers, buddy. Do a little tickling, do some stuff when those bucks aren't there. He's like, well, I didn't even think about that. Well, he's been watching it for how many nights now actually happening. So he did. And I knew this kid, and he kept telling me, that this was a giant buck. And so I'm assuming that his giant buck was 140 inches, which is a good deer, don't get me wrong. But when I hear people tell me giants, I'm thinking, giants. So this kid, he ends up shooting it, calls me up, and he's telling me the whole story. How the deer came out, he grunted at it, did a little bit of tickling with the antlers, and the deer turned and walked into him. He said, it didn't come running like it does in the rut. I said, they're not going to, because it's curiosity. They want to see who's there. They don't want to come and fight. They just want to see who's in their territory. Deer came in, he shot it, 187 and 5/8.
Whoa.
So, it was a giant. So it works. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's that's a big deer. I don't care what state you're from or where you hunt. 187 inches.
Yeah.
So
How'd the kid keep it together?
I don't really know, to be honest with you. Because, a couple years prior to that, he's like, man, I just shot an absolute giant. You see this thing, it's huge. We got out there, it's like a 115-inch deer. He's like, it's the biggest deer I've ever seen, I've ever shot. And so that's why when you tell me that this thing was a giant, I was like, okay. So I don't know if he just truly didn't know that it was that big, and that's how he kept it together. But I know once we found it, he didn't keep it together very good after that. So it was pretty neat to watch him. So, but it was a neat deer, and he said it worked just great. He said, but again, at this time of year, they're not going to come running to you. They take their time, and slowly come in, because it's the curiosity factor at that time.
What dates are those again? So the light tickling, and that's what I call them, tickling the
Yep.
points. Actually, I just tick the points.
Yep. And usually you start, here in Wisconsin, I'll say the opening weekend. So like around that 15th, and it goes all the way up until usually the end of the first week of October, second week of October, because then what happens is you fall into our October lull. And so anytime right up till then, it usually works because they're trying to figure that out. They want to know who's who and who's moving into areas, because sometimes those deer die. We have CWD here, so sometimes they'll die from that, or they die from EHD. They get hit by a car, they hit, or they just get pressured and moved to a different area. So now there's a new buck in that area. So, they're always trying to figure out who's moving into their home range, these mature deer are. And so they want to push them out, or are going to get pushed out themselves into a different home range. So that's why it works so well.
How big's my home range? I'm a mature buck. I'm 4.5, 5.5 years old. How big's my home range?
You're definitely a mature buck. I'll give you that. So.
Come on, Art. Come on, brother.
Hey, we're all there. We're all there, hey. Bruce. That's all I can say.
That's all I can say. My home range is pretty darn good. It's about 1,000 miles come fall.
Yeah, my home range goes a long ways, but actually, that's the funny part is, as we get older, we travel a little bit farther, but as the deer gets older, his home range gets smaller and smaller. And it's kind of neat because right now I'm doing some studies with the DNR, and we've been tagging deer and putting collars on them, so we get to watch where they actually move to and what they're doing. And they're finding out that these older mature deer, a 1 and 2 year old, they don't travel too far yet. A 3 and a 4 year old, those deer, I was talking to the guys that were running the collars the other day, and they've got a buck right now that is 12.5 miles away from where they collared it.
Whoa.
So yeah, he's moved a long, long ways. The majority of them don't. Most of these, and then as they get to 5, 6, and 7 years old, they're finding out that some of these deer live in 800-900 acres or less. They keep getting smaller and smaller depending on the topography of the land and different things. But so it's kind of different watching that and how they are. But yeah, as they get older, their home range shrinks. But that 3 and 4 year old, those bucks will travel a long ways. It's just like us. When we were 16, 17 years old, we'd go so far. But once we got into our 20s, man, we'd take a car and you'd drive 50, 60, 100 miles just to go see your girlfriend or farther. And so at that time, it's no different than them. That's how I class that 3 and 4 year old deer, is that 20 to 25 or 28 year old man that likes to fight and likes to travel, and he's the one that likes to do that. As they get older, I look at it like my dad, who's in his mid 70s. He's got his own routine and just kind of keeps staying closer to home and staying closer to home as the years go on. And so that's what deer do too. So
thanks for that. And a lot of people have different ideas about it, but pretty much listen to what Art says, because if you got the right size acreage and doing everything with your food plots, you're holding mature bucks even if you haven't seen them, because he's there.
Oh yeah, they're there. They're pretty sneaky though, so they got to figure it out. So, but so moving on with this though, we get into, as I said, after we get done with that, now we get into the October lull. Everybody hates the October lull. The thing is with the October lull, calls don't work real well. Very few do. And the reason is because a lot of these older deer, the mature deer, they start locking down on your proteins. They want your acorn ridges. They want whatever you have planted in your fields that are the highest protein, because they know that the daylight's getting a little bit shorter. So they know what's going to happen here shortly. And they're going to be burning all that protein and all that fat off. So they're trying to put on as much weight as they can. So you just have to hunt them smarter, get in their bedroom or get as close to their bedroom as you can. And at that time, you might try to do a little bit of social grunts or some challenge grunts as you get closer to the end of that October lull. Then you could start maybe a few challenge. But honestly, at that time, it's pretty tough to call deer because they just don't want to move much, especially those mature deer. They don't want to go anywhere.
So, yeah, it's food source. It's food source hunting, during those days.
Yep. It is,
That's what
but
you got to do.
when you're, it is, and the problem is when you're in there though on a food source is you have to hunt that food source smart because they don't want to travel far. So now they're bedding closer to those food sources. So you have to get your ingress and egress routes, so that they're not winding you walking in. They're not seeing you. You have to be screened. There's little things that you have to do different to get in there. Because if you keep bumping him off of there, you're going to bump him and not even know you're bumping him, and then he's going to disappear. So you just have to be smarter in how you hunt those little areas. But it can be done because they have to still eat. They have to, they have to drink. They have to eat. They have to do their thing. They can't just disappear. I've always heard that people like, all my bucks just disappeared. It's the October lull. They did not get on a plane and go to Jamaica for vacation for 2 weeks. It just did not happen. At least not that I've ever been aware of. They're there and they're there somewhere. It's just that they don't want to move as much. So you just have to adapt to it.
Yeah, here's a whitetail rendezvous tip. Long distance scout. If you know the buck's there, you got to have him on your trail camera, and where'd he go? So get on a hillside a mile away, get good glass, and watch that food source. Early in the morning, late in the day, low light conditions, but watch that, and you'd be surprised what you're going to see. Your thoughts?
I 100% agree with you. And, try not to put pressure on him because the more pressure you put, the more he's going to move. And they don't like pressure, especially those older deer. They just don't like it. So scout from a distance, great point, and then try to sneak into those areas if you've got good ingress and egress routes and get in there and hunt them smart. So
yeah, the final thing on that, you got one shot. I call it's a one-shot deal on that food source because if you blow him out, he's gone.
Yep, definitely. And here's a little tip for you that I like to do at nights. If I'm hunting a food source early in the year and you've got a concentration of does and fawns and stuff on that field, but you still got those big deer, what I like to do is I like to take a coyote howler with me. And then as it gets dark, wait until right after dark, and then, or just so you can't see, and I'll blow that coyote howler down in the woods like I'm in the woods and make it sound like I'm getting closer to that field. So then those deer, all of a sudden, they'll bust off that field and think it's a coyote. As soon as I see those deer get off that field, that's when we'll pack up, get out of that tree instead of having to walk through them and bust them out of there ourselves. Let them think that it's a coyote or something coming into that field to bust them out. Get them off that field and get out of there as fast as you can. Then you can come back and hunt that, because if they get you as a person coming through and busting them out, you're going to get your one-shot deal or two-shot, and they're going to be gone, especially the older deer. But you do that as a coyote, some type of animal like that, and get them busted off of there, you've got a better shot at it more often. So,
thanks for those little tips, Art. Let's get back. Bob, you got any questions?
Nope, I'm soaking it up.
All right. We'll get back to, now we get into the fun phase. This is phase 3. This is the pre-rut phase. Here in the Midwest, I'm looking at October 25th through November 10th. This is when you can cut loose, because a lot of your deer are still on a pattern. They're going to your food sources. They're going to different areas, and they're really susceptible to being called in at this point in time. So now you can get into your long drawn out buck fights. Get your heavier antlers out. You can get
Whitetail Rendezvous is pleased to announce a partnership with GoHunt.com. Who's GoHunt.com? Well, if you're a DIY hunter, you need the information at GoHunt.com/insider. Why? Because it provides 4,200 profiles, every unit, every species, and every season. Furthermore, they give in-depth analysis, interactive maps, unit access, and seasonal trends. Draw odds are very important, and they give you the most accurate information in the business. All this is available when you go to GoHunt.com/insider. Make sure you use promo code WR when you join Insider. You'll get a $50 gift card for GoHunt.com Gear Shop. All in all, if you're hunting out west in 2018, GoHunt.com Insider is where you need to be to get all the research information. When you use promo code WR, Whitetail Rendezvous receives a small commission from GoHunt.com.
Bigger rack pack, sound like more mature deer, because this is when your mature deer are fighting. This is when they're getting very territorial. They're fighting over does. They're just doing their thing. And so you can do that long drawn out buck fight. And I always laugh when I've heard people say, well, or the question is, so how long should I rattle for? How long should I rattle? What should I do? How should I? And I've listened to people say, well, here's the deal. Rattle for 30 seconds, then blow 2 grunts, then rattle for a minute, blow a grunt, then do. I've never heard a deer in my life do that. I've heard deer where they've come up and they'll walk by each other, and all of a sudden they'll turn around, and you'll see them, and they just kind of tick a little bit, maybe crack their antlers once, and that's it. They'll push once, and they know who's who already, and they're done. Then you get a couple mature deer. They'll come in there, and all of a sudden they'll start, they'll crack, and they'll go at it for 45 minutes straight. I've heard them, watch them break over little trees and saplings and just go at it. At the same time, however, I'm sitting there and I usually, and it'll look goofy on here, I'm going to tell you that ahead of time. So, but I will usually take that grunt call and I'll hold on to it with my mouth, because when that deer, when they stop for a second, when they push off again, they usually exhale and grunt. So make it sound realistic, because they're going to grunt at the same time they're pushing with those antlers as they exhale. So if you're trying to rattle, then you put the antlers down, then you try to grunt, do those things, it doesn't sound realistic. Okay, so you want to sound as realistic as you can. But during this time, like I said, you can do these long, drawn-out challenge grunts. Usually a grunting series at this time, I'll start out, I'll just and then I'll either snort wheeze if I see that deer and know where he's at, know what he's doing. If I don't see him, I'll do that challenge grunt. Then I'll get into rattling. Because usually that's what they do. They don't just walk by each other and crack their antlers. They usually see each other and they'll grunt, they'll snort wheeze, do something to each other. So that time of year you can do that. Very aggressive tending grunts. This is when you want to take both these with you. And so you can start with your estrus bleat. And as you're doing that, you can turn and make that sound one way or another. That's what calls these turn for. That's why they're flexible. So you can. So now you sound like you're actually physically chasing her instead of grunting. Don't ever grunt right straight at an animal. They'll pick you out like that. You always want to sound one way or another. Okay, so start one way and go the other and sound like you're actually following that doe back and forth. The nice thing with these is because they turn like that, you don't have to sit in a tree and have all this movement. All you have to do is move your hand, and that's it, back and forth.
Let's give a plug for that grunt tube. Who makes it?
Night and Hail. Night and Hail makes this, and they've also got there's a couple different ones out there that they have. This year they've got a new bone collector series out that is actually very similar to this, but instead of changing here, that one actually you press down on. And all of them, it's each one is different. So one thing that you have to do is try them all out and get used to them. Because if you look at like the bone, they call it, this one, you hear the sound in that. On. Sound completely different. This one takes more to blow and break over than this one does. So, you need to really work with these so that when you get excited, you don't sound like a wounded duck and go. So if all of a sudden that's not a good deal. that
I've done
big
that.
deer's
I'm
coming.
guilty. I'm guilty. Sorry.
And all of a sudden you want to go and challenge grunt him and go. Instead you go. And that's not going to work, guys. So it's a bad deal. So each one breaks over to different points. So and that's why each manufacturer too has so many different ones. Nightingale has, I believe it's 4 or 5 different grunt tubes. Some are just straight grunt tubes. Some actually have, death chamber. They call it. This is built right in for your snort wheezes. You've got this one here is one of my favorites. Is the natural. This thing sounds incredible, and it's got the tube on it, and the tube is adjustable. So this one, and it's made out of wood. So that one blows over a little different than these do. Everyone, changes a little bit. So get used to those. But again, use those aggressive tending grunts at this time. Get aggressive with those because this is when those does are starting to come in and they're really starting to push them to see who's in heat and who isn't. The thing is, though, is if you don't have a lot of age structure and you just have a lot of 1 and 2 year olds on your farms and you're not into, or even on public land, don't do a lot of the tending grunt. Just use a lot of the easy bleats and do a lot of your estrus bleats at this time. And the reason is because a lot of 3 and 4 year olds are your breeder bucks. And so if they hear that tending grunt a lot, those younger bucks will end up getting scared away. And if there's a lot of guys that'll shoot that 1 and 2 year old, I don't pay for your tag. I'm not pay the taxes on your land. You can shoot whatever you want to shoot. I'm not going to sit here and tell you can't. My own personal, we look at 4, 5, and 6 year olds on our place. Personally, I look at 5 and 6 year olds on my own farm. But again, you look at it's not my land. They can do what they want. So you have to be able to play that though a little bit and say, hey, if this is all I have is the younger group or the younger population, I'm going to scare more of them away by using that tending grunt. So just strictly during this time frame, do your long drawn out buck fights because your 1 and 2 year olds will still fight. You'll call in those 1 and 2 year olds, but the aggressive tending grunts and stuff don't quite get is carried away with those. But if you have a good age structure, have at it because you're going to call in a lot more of those mature bucks throughout that time frame. In your snort wheeze, guys, this is that time frame right now, that October 25th through that November 10th. That snort wheeze, man, that's money. You want to kill big deer and call in big deer. When you see that deer walk across the field, most guys I talk to, the problem is they'll say, well, yeah, I grunted at that deer in this time frame. And they'll go, I'm like, all right, that's a social grunt. They don't want to do that. You got to remember, guys, we're in an intimidation factor now, okay? It's all about intimidation during this time frame. That's not very intimidating, okay? So we have to figure out what is intimidating. Intimidating is a challenge grunt and a snort wheeze. So if you challenge grunt him, he's going to stop and get his attention. Now let him get to that point. Now you snort wheeze. You do that, more than likely that buck, if he's not on a hot doe, he's going to come inside out and he's going to come like hot and heavy and fast because he doesn't want you in his territory. He wants to know who the intruder is. We've killed a lot of really good bucks, some 5 and 6 year old deer. And when I mean 5 and 6 year old deer, we take our teeth here because I'm so into the age thing that we actually take our teeth out of those deer and I send them to a place in Montana to have those teeth aged so that we're not just looking at a jaw guessing. We actually get the actual age of these deer. So we know how old it is. I did read today, however, that there is a new place in Michigan that's a lot closer to me, so I might be sending them to Michigan instead. But, so that's how we really tell how old these deer are and can break that down. So at that time frame, though, again, that snort wheeze is very, very effective. But make sure you see where he's at and have at it with him. So, and then what we do is, then what happens is after they get through that pre-rut and that real intimidation stage. Now they get into what peak rut. This is the breeding season, lockdown, everything else. Guys, I don't like this time of year, I'll be honest with you, because what happens is that buck that I've been patterning all year and looking for, he could be 3 miles away. He could be 5 miles away on a hot doe somewhere. Granted, I could have somebody else's buck in there, but the one that I really wanted to go after, he may not be there anymore. Or he may be almost impossible to call in because he's locked down with a doe somewhere. And this is the time frame, that 10th of November through the 20th, 25th, that a lot of guys are using those social grunts or they're rattling and it's not working for them. Why? Because they're using either a social grunt or an intimidation factor, and they don't want to be intimidated. They've already been through that stage. Now it's all about jealousy. Now they're like, well, so who's in our territory chasing that doe? So what I really focus on now is I really change things up, and I really want to do the estrus whines, the fawn bleats, and the tending grunts. And look at that. Especially if I see that buck chasing a doe and she won't stop, that means she's not ready. So now I got to hit that jealousy factor, because they know those daylight, the hours of daylight is getting as short as it's going to get, and the days are numbered. Mother Nature says, hey, your days are numbered. You need to get this done. So why would I want to fight anymore? If all of a sudden Mother Nature says, hey, you got 10 days left to make this happen, would I rather go find a new hot doe, or would I rather go over and fight somebody? I'm not going to fight somebody. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to go find that hot doe. That's just the way it's going to work. And that's what these bucks, these older deer, are doing. So if they're chasing that doe and she's not ready, hit him hard with those estrus whines and a tendon grunt. All of a sudden, he's going to be like, whoa, wait a minute here. Now I'm jealous. Who's the hot doe and who is chasing her? Because we've already established dominance. I'm in this area. This is my home range. And who is that? So now he wants to go kick that buck out of there. So I really focus on that at this time, and try to get away from the dominance calls. Try to get away from the rattling. Rattling sometimes will work if you actually physically watch a buck breed a doe. When he dismounts her, sometimes the rattling will work. I don't know if it's, and I've asked a few biologists, and I've never really got a straight answer, but I don't know if it's the shift in hormones after, just breeding or what that puts him in that outrage again. But sometimes that will work, and that rattling works then. But I've had a lot better luck and more success by just going to jealousy calls than working with dominancy calls throughout that whole time frame. So then, of course, we get into rifle season in a lot of different states. It's still that most of those are through that jealousy factor, so they still work up until usually after the second or third day, and they've been shot at enough they kind of go underground and disappear for a little bit. And then all of a sudden you get to the end of the year, you'll start getting in that last phase, I call it, or the fifth phase. This phase from December 5th is what I usually say until the end of the season, post-rut. Concentrate heavily on your food sources, guys. Your food sources, if you have the best food, and as a land management guy that goes out and sets up property, this is one thing that I really like to concentrate on, is having the best winter food sources available. Again, watching these studies with the DNR, and watching a lot of these deer coming into these food sources, they're looking at this year some of the biggest congregation of deer coming into some food sources that we had were between 5 and 7 miles from deer coming from that far in, plus keeping our own deer there. This is a great time you can shoot your neighbor's buck and let your buck get to another year, and I got some great neighbors. So, we always joke about that. And I'm like, don't worry about it. I said in December, I'll shoot your deer. But we already know, we all get together and know all the deer and stuff. But it might be a deer that you've never seen that's an old, mature deer from 5 miles away that you could then shoot and let your deer get another, a year on it and get more mature. But what happens then is because they congregate on these food sources so much, is you have to go back to the socialization factors that you did early in the season. Because now all of a sudden these mature bucks, they're going to start laying close. They want to get close to those food sources because they don't want to burn that energy. They need to put all that fat back on. So if you've got, great brassicas and you've got beans or corn, different things in there for them to eat, what I like to do, this is the time of year that I like to use a decoy. And I'll take a decoy and put that out there. And then I'll start doing my social vocalizations, my doe bleats, my social buck grunts, and my light sparring again. If you ever go and you grab game cameras late in the season like this, all of a sudden you pick those up, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, why are these bucks fighting all the time? And you've got a lot of these little bucks that are fighting. And that's because a lot of deer got shot during deer season, during rifle season. They got pushed out of different territories, different areas. Now all of a sudden they're there and they go, well, who are you and who are you? And so they're trying to figure out who's who again. And it's that game all over again because they've got all these new deer on these food sources. So to get them out there early, I like to put that decoy out there and sound like either that doe or like that young buck that's out there and get that big deer on his feet earlier in the day and make him feel calm and curious. Say, hey, look, there's already deer out there. We're good. I can get out there. That deer's not spooked. He's talking. I'm going to go hang out with him and do what I got to do. So that phase is a really good phase to get back to the basics as you would early in the season. So
Art, talk about the secondary rut.
Well, there's a secondary rut, and I don't have that in there.
I said it wrong. It's really the young of the year coming into estrus.
Okay, and usually because in the seminar I actually have another slide that's just a deer that was shot during that because it's such a short time frame. It's a very short period where you look at it anywhere from 28 to 35 days usually after that first doe is bred. So what you need to do is if you have a good relationship with your neighbors or if you're really paying attention out there on public land, whatever, when you see that first doe being bred or hear about that first doe being bred, mark your calendars. Because usually if she's not bred or if the other does and the young fawns aren't bred, 28 to 35 days later, they'll come back into heat again. And it's a very short time frame, and so it's a very fast and furious rut because there's not nearly as many of them coming into estrus. And so when that happens, a lot of those bucks, they'll all of a sudden show up out of the woodwork again and start pushing them. This happens usually during this time frame when you're in that phase 5 and when you're back out on those big food sources. So that also affects that. So usually when I get into that first part of phase 5 is I will actually carry all my estrus calls with me too, because if I see a doe that's in heat, or if I see a buck that comes out into that food source and starts checking does again, that to me is telling me that there's probably a doe somewhere in the area that's hot. And so the second rut or the second estrus period has started. Then I'll go back to using those estrus calls with tending grunts and do that for a couple days. But it's so short-lived that it's really hard to monitor and figure out. But you're going to use a lot of that same pre-rut strategy during that. But again, you have to be able to really pinpoint it to know when that's happening.
Art, I hate to do this, but we're coming up on our hard stop. So why don't you take the final 5 minutes and summarize, and then we got a caller good.
Yeah, and I'm going to take and let me pop up a couple of photos here real quick. And because you were kind enough to share them. Have you got that one in front of you?
Yep. So and that actually is one of those. That's the secondary rut. That deer came out and was actually checking a few does where it was at, and so I actually hit an estrus bleat with that and did a tending grunt, and that deer turned and walked right to me. And I was actually set up to hunt that in a just a strict phase 5. So that was knowing when those dates were. That's what helped me kill that deer.
Then we got this boy.
Yeah, that deer was that was a November 12th, I think, deer, November 13th, and that deer was a Kansas deer. So in Kansas, they're about a week later than us. So that was that pre-rut fun stage. Actually, snort wheezed that deer into me. Rattled and grunted him in first. Things didn't happen. He kind of got away from me. Snort wheezed him back to me, and ended up getting lucky and having success on him too. So, and
I love that
deer,
buck. I love that deer.
That deer was different. That deer I actually heard tending a doe, and so I went right into tending a doe too. The whole woods went completely quiet, and he challenge grunted me, and so I challenge grunted him back. And then when I finally saw that deer and saw what he was, I snort wheezed that deer, and he actually came in and tried to cut so close to me. I was in a ground blind, tried to cut so close to me that I actually shot that deer at 5 yards off the ground.
Was that a Kansas buck?
That was, yep. So they got some good deer out there.
And this is how people find you.
Yep, and that's how they find me. So, and I guess the last thing here, real quick, because I know we're at the hard cut, and I was actually done with the seminar. Your best places, find some deer vocalization CDs or YouTube. Google them again. Basic grunts, bleats, and whines. Practice at home again, so you don't sound like a wounded duck when that comes in. So you'll know how that reed breaks over and stuff. So with that, guys, I really I don't have a lot more to add to it, but thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm going to give a little shout out to Whitetail Rendezvous. Art's going to be one of our summer guest hosts. And so we're going to have a little Bruce and Art show sometime June and July and somewhat in August, depending on Art's schedule. But he's going to be co-hosting Whitetail Rendezvous, and you can find us any place in the world, digital world. Just type in Whitetail Rendezvous, and I'm out there.
It's fun, and I appreciate it, and it's been a blast, guys.
Art, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and...
On the next episode, we're heading up to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we're going to meet up with a friend of mine, Frans Diepstraten. And Hans is originally from the Netherlands, and he came over to Canada simply because he wanted more opportunity for himself, and he loves to hunt, and he loves to chase wild sheep and elk and moose and anything else on 4 feet. So he headed this way with his wife, and he works there in the Calgary area. But more important than that, he's a full-time hunter. He's a hunter 365 days a year, and he's going to talk about that extensively. What does that mean? Well, that means he stays in shape. He keeps his gear in shape. He keeps his shooting practices. Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today. He does all those things just for that 1 5-second opportunity that the critters give him.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.